My name is Abdul Muiz Karim. In my language, that name means servant of the one who gives honor. My mother gave me that name on the day I was born, and she always said it with pride. She believed that a name like that would shape a person. She believed that the weight of a name like that would keep a man on the right path for his whole life. She was not wrong about the weight. She just did not know where that path would eventually take me. I was born in a small house with a loud family. We were not rich. We were not poor. We were somewhere in the middle, the kind of family where the food was always enough but the future was never certain. My father was a quiet man who prayed 5 times every day without fail. He never missed a prayer. Not once, not for anything. I watched him from when I was very small, and something about the way he lowered his head to the ground, the way his whole body became still, stayed with me. It was the most serious thing I had ever seen a person do. I started memorizing the Quran when I was 7 years old. My teacher was an old man who had no patience for laziness but had all the patience in the world for someone who was trying. He would sit across from me, his eyes closed, listening to every word I spoke, and if I missed even one letter, he would stop me immediately. Not with anger, but with seriousness. He would say, "These are not your words. These words belong to God. You must carry them carefully." I carried them carefully. By the time I was a teenager, people in our community already knew my name. Not because I was loud or showy, but because I was known for going deep. While other boys my age were learning the surface of things, I was asking questions that went further. I wanted to understand not just what the religion said, but why it said it. I wanted to feel it, not just repeat it. That hunger, that desire to understand everything deeply, was what led me to the study of the Sirah. That is the life story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Not just the events, not just the dates and the names and the places, but the human being behind all of it. His fears, his grief, his hope, the things that kept him going when everything around him was falling apart. I gave years to that study. Years of my life, years of my youth. I traveled to learn from scholars who knew more than I did. I read books that were centuries old. I sat in circles where men talked for hours about a single moment in history, examining it from every direction until something new came out of it. And through all of that, I fell in love, not romantically, but the way a person falls in love with something that gives their life meaning. I fell in love with that story. I started teaching it to others when I was in my mid-20s. The first class I ever taught was small. 6 people in a room with plastic chairs and 1 flickering light. I was nervous. My hands were shaking a little, though I tried not to show it. But when I began to speak about him, when I began to tell the story of how revelation first came in that dark cave, something changed in the room. I could feel it. The people leaned in. Their faces became still. And I understood in that moment that this was what I was supposed to do with my life. That first class became a larger class. That larger class became a lecture that people traveled to hear. Over the years, my name spread across communities, across cities, across countries. I was not chasing fame. The fame came because the story was powerful, and I told it with everything I had. I used to begin every lecture the same way. I would ask the audience to close their eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to leave wherever they were and come to a different time and a different place. A rocky hillside outside a city in Arabia more than 1400 years ago. A cave called Hira, small and quiet, where a man used to go alone to think, to reflect, to search for something he could not name. I would describe that cave slowly. The rough walls, the narrow entrance, the silence that was so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. And I would describe the man, sitting there alone in the darkness, not knowing that the world was about to change. And then I would describe the moment it happened. The sudden weight of something that could not be explained. The pressure on his chest so heavy he felt he was being crushed. And then words, not his own words, but words that entered him from somewhere he had never been. Words he could not resist. Words that changed everything. I would describe how he ran. How this man, who would one day be called the greatest human being who ever lived, ran home terrified. Ran to his wife. Ran into her arms and said, "Cover me! Cover me!" His whole body was shaking. He was afraid. He did not understand what had just happened to him, and in that fear, he was fully human, completely human before anything else. And then I would describe Khadija, his wife, the first person to believe in him. Not a famous warrior, not a powerful chieftain, a woman, his wife. She held him, listened to everything he said, and then she looked him in the eyes and told him something that I have thought about more times than I can count. She told him that a man like him would never be abandoned by God. That his kindness, his honesty, his care for others, those things were enough. Those things were proof. Every time I told that part, I had to stop for a moment. Because that moment between two people, that quiet, private moment of fear and comfort, that was the beginning of everything. That was where the whole story started. Not with power, not with victory, with fear and love in a small room. The early years were hard, harder than most people today understand. I would tell my students this clearly. The beginning of Islam was not the beginning of safety. It was the beginning of danger. For the first several years, the people who followed him were mostly the weak ones. The slaves, the poor, the ones that the powerful did not care about. And those were the ones who suffered the most. I spoke about Bilal, the slave who was taken out into the open desert in the heat of the day, laid on the burning sand, and had a heavy rock placed on his chest. His owner stood over him and said, "Reject this new religion or you will die here." And Bilal said one word. He just kept saying one word. A name for God. Just that. His voice was broken, his body was burning, but that one word would not leave him. I used to stop and make sure every person in the room heard that clearly. A man with everything taken from him, in pain that most of us will never know, still refusing. That was the foundation of this religion. Not armies in those early years. Not wealth. Just people who believed something with their whole heart and would not let go of it even when everything was being done to make them let go. The years of boycott. I always spent a long time on that. The Prophet and his family and his followers cut off from the rest of society. Nobody could sell to them. Nobody could buy from them. Nobody could marry into their families or give them any kind of help. They were pushed into a part of the city and left there. And this went on for 3 years. 3 years. I would look at my students and say that slowly so they could really hear it. Not 3 days. Not 3 weeks. 3 years of hunger. 3 years of watching children cry because there was not enough food. 3 years of hearing babies in the night, sick and weak, and having nothing to give them. And the man at the center of this, the one this whole punishment was aimed at, he sat with his people in that hunger. He did not escape it. He did not find a way out for himself while others suffered. He stayed. What kind of person does that? I have asked myself that question so many times over the years. Then came what they call the year of sorrow. That name always felt right to me. It was the year he lost 2 people who had been holding him up. Khadija, his wife of 25 years, the woman who had believed in him before anyone else, she died. And Abu Talib, the uncle who had protected him from the people who wanted to destroy him, he died too. Both in the same year. Both gone. I would describe how after Khadija died, he still kept her memory alive for years. He would send food to her old friends. He would speak about her with love that never faded. Not the love of a man performing something, but the love of a man who genuinely lost something that could not be replaced. That was a human being. And then I always approached that part of the story slowly. I would lower my voice. Not for effect, but because that story always did something to me on the inside. He walked to a city called Taif after all of that loss. He walked there with hope. He went to speak to the leaders of that city, to ask them to listen, to ask for help, to ask for somewhere that his followers could live without being hunted. He was not going as a conqueror. He was going as someone who had run out of other options. They rejected him. Not quietly, not politely, but with cruelty. They called on their children, the young boys of that city, to follow him as he left, to throw stones at him, to chase him out. And so they did. He walked and the stones came. He walked and the blood came. He kept walking until he could not go further, and he sat down in an orchard, his feet bleeding, his body exhausted, and he prayed. And in that prayer, he did not ask for those people to be destroyed. He did not ask for punishment to fall on them. He said, If this hardship was not because God was angry with him, then he could bear it. He said he hoped that from those very people, from the children of those who stoned him, would come people who would believe. He chose mercy. Not because mercy was easy, not because he was not in pain, but because mercy was what he believed in even when he had every right to want something else. I used to tell my students, if that does not reach you, I do not know what will. And I meant it. Every time. The migration to Medina was a new chapter. A painful chapter in its own way, but a forward chapter. Leaving behind everything familiar. Leaving the city where he was born, where his family was buried, where every memory he had lived. Walking away from it not because he wanted to, but because there was no choice. In Medina he built something. Not just a mosque, but a community. A real living community where people from different backgrounds, different tribes, different histories, came together under one purpose. I would describe how he personally helped carry bricks to build that mosque. The leader of the whole movement, the one everyone was following, carrying bricks alongside everyone else. Not standing to the side giving instructions. Working. I admired that. I taught about the battles. Badr, where a small group of people stood against a much larger force and, against everything that should have been possible, they held. Uhud, where things did not go as planned, where the result was painful, where he himself was wounded, where his uncle Hamza was killed in a way so brutal that when he saw it, he had to look away. I described that grief carefully, because I wanted people to understand that this was not a story without loss. This was a man who carried real grief and kept going anyway. The trench. A city about to be attacked by an enormous army, and the plan was to dig. Just to dig. To dig a trench so wide and so deep that the army could not cross it. And he dug with his own hands. Hungry because food was short. Cold because the nights were cold. Tired because they had been working for days. But he dug. And then the return to Mecca. 10 years after he had walked out of that city a refugee, he came back. The city was open before him. The people who had spent years trying to destroy him, who had chased him out, who had hunted his followers, killed some of them, tortured others, those people were now standing before him with nothing between them and whatever he decided to do next. He forgave them. He asked them what they thought he was going to do to them, and they said they hoped he would be generous, that he was a generous brother and the son of a generous brother. And he said, "Go. You are free." Just like that. That was the peak of the story as I always taught it. That moment when he had everything, every reason to make people pay, every right to take some kind of justice, and he chose not to. I taught that story hundreds of times. But it was the end of his life that I always found hardest to tell. The farewell Hajj. He stood before tens of thousands of people and delivered a speech that every generation since has read and studied. I would describe the scene carefully. The size of the crowd. The silence of that many people all at once. And his voice, reaching them, carrying something that many of them felt but did not yet know how to name. He told them to take care of each other, to protect the rights of women, to not harm one another, to carry this message to those who were not there. And then he asked them, "Have I delivered the message?" And they said yes. And he pointed to the sky and said, "God, be my witness." And then, quietly, at the end, he said something that cut through everything. He said he did not know if they would see each other again after this. Every time I told that part, the room went quiet. And something in me went quiet too. He became ill not long after. His body weakened. The man who had carried so much for so long was now too weak to lead the prayers. He asked Abu Bakr to lead in his place. I described the weight of that moment, the people realizing that something was ending, the man who had been the center of everything becoming too weak to stand at the front. And then I would reach the last part. He died in the room of his wife Aisha. I would lower my voice as I told it, his head in her lap, his breathing growing slow. His last words, reaching for something none of the people in the room could see, saying that he wanted to be with the highest companionship. And then he was gone. Every time. That stillness in the room when I finished that part was unlike anything else I ever experienced as a teacher. It was not just sadness. It was something bigger than sadness. It was the feeling of something real and heavy and true. I would finish and sit quietly for a moment before speaking again. But here is the thing I never told anyone for a long time. After every one of those lectures, when the room emptied and I was alone, I felt something I did not have a word for. Something that had nothing to do with doubt. I was not doubting anything. I was fully committed to everything I taught. But there was a question that would not leave me, a quiet thing that stayed after everything else went away. I buried it. I kept teaching. I kept preaching. Outwardly, nothing changed. Until the year everything changed. My community had grown. My name was known. I had built something over many years of work, something I was genuinely proud of. I had students who looked at me the way I had once looked at my own teachers. I had people who came to me with their hardest questions, their deepest confusion, and trusted me to help them find their way through it. And then I began asking questions that I had never allowed myself to ask before. Not out loud. Not to anyone. Just inside, late at night when everything was quiet. Questions about things I had always accepted without looking at them too closely. And the more I looked, the more unsettled I became. Not because anything I had taught was fake, I still believed in the power and truth of those stories, but because I started to feel that something was incomplete inside me. Like a room that had all its furniture in place but no light coming through the windows. I did not tell anyone what I was feeling. But in a community like mine, a closed and tight community where everyone knows everyone and the scholars are watched closely, it is very hard to keep something completely hidden. Questions leave traces. Silence in the wrong moment leaves traces. The way you pause before answering something you would normally answer quickly, that leaves traces too. Someone noticed. I do not know exactly who saw what or how it traveled, but word got around that something was wrong with me. That I was drifting. That I had been asking questions about things that were not appropriate to question. And in my community, that was not just a personal matter. That was a danger to everyone. A scholar who questions becomes a scholar who misleads. That was how they saw it. At first it was quiet. People stopped greeting me the same way. Conversations ended a little earlier than they used to. Invitations stopped coming. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was imagining it. I was not imagining it. One night, very late, 3 men came to my house. Men I had known for years. Men who had sat in my lectures and nodded along to everything I said. They came inside and sat down and told me plainly that there were serious concerns about me. They said people were worried. They said I needed to come before the community leaders and answer some questions. I went. I answered everything honestly. Too honestly, maybe. I said I was searching. I said I had questions. I said I was not abandoning anything, but I was looking more carefully at things I had always accepted. I said a searching mind is not a broken mind. They did not see it that way. What followed was weeks of pressure. Visits. Phone calls. People talking to my family members, to my wife, to people I worked with. I was told to stop speaking publicly until the matter was resolved. I was told that my behavior was putting the community at risk. I was told that if I did not come back in line, I would be cut off completely. I tried to explain. I tried to talk. But there was no real conversation happening. The decision was already made and they were just waiting for me to agree with it. I did not agree. And that is when things became very serious. There was a gathering called. A formal one. I was told to come and I came. I walked into a room full of faces I recognized, most of them men I had known for a long time, some of them people I had taught, some of them people who had taught me. And the tone in that room was not the tone of people who wanted to listen. The charges against me were read out. That I had gone astray. That I had been speaking things that went against the faith. That I was a danger to the community. That the only correct response was to make an example of me so that others would not be influenced by what I was doing. I stood in front of that gathering and I heard words I never thought I would hear directed at me. The word that was used, the sentence that was passed, was that I should be killed. That a man who leaves the faith and refuses to return deserves death. And they were not speaking in symbols. They meant it literally. There were people in that room who were prepared to carry it out. I remember how my legs felt at that moment. I remember that my body went completely cold even though the room was warm. I remember looking at the faces of men I had known for years and not finding anything there that I recognized. Not one face that showed hesitation. Not one face that looked uncertain about what was being said. They called it justice. They called it protecting the community. They called it what had to be done. Someone grabbed my arms from behind. I was pushed forward toward the front of the room. A man stood up with something in his hands. The room was very loud and then very quiet, the kind of quiet that is louder than noise. I did not have the time to think clearly. My mind was not working in full sentences. I was just present in my body, feeling every second, every breath, knowing that the next moment could be my last. I did something I had not done in that way for a very long time. I prayed. Not the formal prayer, not the words I had memorized since childhood. Just me talking directly, raw and simple and desperate, saying, "If you are there, if you are real, I need you right now. Not tomorrow. Right now." And then something happened. I do not have fancy words for it. I have thought about how to describe it many times, and I keep coming back to the same simple description. Something stopped. Not me. Not the people in that room. Something in the room itself stopped. A kind of stillness that did not come from any person. A quiet that came from somewhere else entirely. The man who was standing in front of me took one step forward and then stopped. He looked confused. He looked like a person who had lost the thought he was in the middle of thinking. The hands that were holding me loosened without anyone telling them to. And then there was confusion. Not from something anyone could point to, no loud sound, no sudden interruption, no one running in through a door. Just a confusion that passed through the room like something moving through water. People looked at each other. The energy that had been so certain, so decided, came apart like it had never really been there at all. In that confusion, a man I barely knew, someone I had seen maybe twice in my life, a quiet man who had been standing near the back of the room, came to me. He did not make a show of it. He just moved in a calm, ordinary way to where I was standing, took my arm gently, and guided me toward the side door of the room. Nobody stopped him. Nobody seemed to notice, even though they should have noticed. We walked out into the night air and I stood there breathing. That man said almost nothing. He looked at me for a moment and said, "Go. Do not come back here tonight." I went. I walked for a long time. I do not know how long. I was not going anywhere specific. I was just walking and breathing and being alive in a way that surprised me, because a few minutes ago I had not been sure I would continue to be alive. My family was not home when I got back. They were with relatives. I went inside and sat on the floor of the main room in the dark, and I stayed there. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I just sat. And in that sitting, something opened up in me. All the walls I had built, all the careful organization of my beliefs, all the things I had been so sure about for so long, something moved in all of that. Not collapsed, but shifted. Like when you move a heavy piece of furniture that has been in one place for so long that there is a mark on the floor where it stood, and you move it and now you can see the floor underneath for the first time. I thought about the question I had been carrying for years. That quiet thing that would not leave. And in that night, I did not run from it. I let myself feel it fully for the first time. It was a question about completion. About whether the story I had been telling all my life was finished or whether it pointed towards something further. Not away from everything I had loved and studied and taught, but forward from it. As if the story I knew was chapter 1 and I had never turned the page. The weeks after that night were unlike anything I had experienced before. I was cut off from my community completely. My family was hurt and confused. My wife did not know what to say to me. My children were young enough that they did not fully understand, but old enough to feel that something big was happening. I lost friendships that had been part of my daily life for over a decade. People I had eaten with, traveled with, prayed with. Gone. I was completely alone in a way I had never been. And in that aloneness, with nothing else to occupy me, I started really searching. Not the careful, controlled searching of a scholar who knows what answer he is supposed to find. Real searching. The kind where you do not know where you will end up. I started reading things I had never allowed myself to read before. I started asking questions I had never asked out loud before. I started having conversations I had never had before. And slowly, piece by piece, something started taking shape in me that I did not yet have a name for. One night, deep in that Ramadan, I sat alone very late after everyone in the house had gone to sleep. It was the kind of silence that only comes at 3 in the morning. Everything completely still. And I prayed, not in the way I had been taught, not in a form or a structure, but just directly. Just myself and God and nothing between us. I said, I have given my life to searching for you. I have taught your name and your message to hundreds of people. I have carried this as carefully as I knew how to carry it. But I am lost right now. I am more lost than I have ever been. And I am asking you to show me, not what I already know. Show me what I am missing. Show me truth even if truth is something I did not expect. That prayer did not produce a light from the ceiling. There was no voice in the room. But something happened in me after I said those words. A quietness came that was different from the quietness of that room. A peace that I can only describe as something I had never felt before in all my years of religious life. Not the peace that comes from feeling right. A different peace. The peace that comes when something searching finally stops searching and begins to find. Over the following months, I encountered the teachings of Jesus Christ. I did not jump into anything. I was not a person who changed easily or quickly. I pushed back. I argued. I sat with things that made me uncomfortable and made myself stay there until I understood them better. I did not want to trade one certainty for another certainty without understanding what I was doing. But there was a quality to what I was encountering that I had not expected. It was personal. That is the only word I have for it. Not in the sense of small or private, but personal in the sense of direct. A relationship that did not go through systems and structures and long chains of authority. Something that reached into the part of me that all my scholarship had never quite touched. I thought about the story I had spent my life telling. The man who retreated to a cave seeking something he could not name. The man who trembled when the weight of something too large came down on him. The man who spent years being rejected and hurt and losing the people he loved, who kept going anyway. The man who chose mercy every single time he had the choice. I did not stop honoring that story, but I began to understand, slowly and then all at once, that it had always been moving me towards something. That all those years of feeling that quiet question in the silence after my lectures, that had been something real, the pull towards something further, not against what I had been, but continuing from it. The journey cost me almost everything I had built. I will not pretend otherwise. I lost my position. I lost my community. I lost relationships that had been part of who I was. There were months that were genuinely very hard, not just emotionally but practically, in daily life, in finances, in the loneliness of being someone that people you loved had decided they did not know anymore. But I also found something I do not have good enough words for. I found the thing that had been missing from that room that had all its furniture in the right place. Light through the window. Something warm and direct and real that did not depend on how much I knew or how well I had performed or how many people were listening to me. Today I look back at everything I was and everything I taught, and I feel something complicated, because complicated is the honest word. I feel deep respect for the years I gave to that study, for the sincerity with which I carried it, for the things I learned about endurance and mercy and what it looks like to keep going when everything is against you. Those lessons did not become useless. They became part of the foundation of who I am now. But my story did not end at the place I thought it would end. I am the son of a quiet man who prayed with his whole body 5 times every day. I am the student of an old teacher who said that sacred words must be carried carefully. I am the scholar who stood in rooms full of people and told a 1400-year-old story with everything he had. I am the man who stood in a room one night and heard words that were supposed to end him, and did not end him. I'm all of those things. And I am also the man who prayed alone at 3 in the morning and asked to be shown what was true, and kept his promise to go wherever the answer led. That is my name. That is my story. I am Abdul Muiz Karim, servant of the one who gives honor. And I am still learning what that means.